Bad things just happen. It's inevitable. So what we need to do is proactively plan for those bad things that will inevitably potentially happen carefully ahead of time. And that's where planning for disasters comes in. We're talking about things like a business continuity plan or a BCP. The overall purpose of this is to ensure that we can continue with the nature of our business in the event of some kind of a negative disruption, whether it's a malware outbreak, a failed server hard disk, a lost network connection, whatever it happens to be. So this is all about continuity of operations. That's often referred to as COOP, C-O-O-P. Now this is a very broad scope though. So the business continuity plan is not specific to a certain server, a certain network, or anything like that. It's just a very general, broad statement. However, the disaster recovery plan, or the DRP, is much more specific. In other words, you're going to have multiple disaster recovery plans for different subsystems. Maybe I have a DRP for an e-commerce server, how to recover it in a hurry when it goes down. Maybe I have a disaster recovery plan for corrupted files and how to restore them from backup as quickly as possible. So it's a much narrower scope than the business continuity plan would refer to. Now, organizational policies will dictate exactly how we implement these, and it will relate to things like change management, when we have configuration changes, and asset management, and security. So different types of policies will utilize some of the aspects of disaster recovery plans. So pictured on the screen, we have a sense of what we might expect in terms of disasters, and it's not always cybersecurity attacks. Certainly we have that in the bottom right, but what about intentional sabotage from within, like unleashing malware? That could happen. We have to think about how to recover from that. Natural disasters. Well, pictured here we have a volcano, but it could be a tornado. It could be a strong storm that knocks the power out. Man-made disasters. Things like oil spills that might affect sites or locations for evacuation purposes. All these things we have to consider. So it's not just about the technology, but it certainly does include the technology. So when you're planning for this, you have to think about disaster recovery sites. What happens if our primary site of business cannot be accessed for some reason, or there's no power, or we're evacuated from the building, anything like that? Well, you need an alternate location where you can continue business operations. So you need to do a site risk assessment to determine what the likelihood of that actually happening is. If your organization has a building that's situated in a floodplain, well, then you have a higher likelihood of dealing with the flood and that affecting that area than higher elevated areas. So the site components that we have to think about that need to be protected at the digital and the physical level would include hardware, so equipment, software, the resultant data, and of course the safety of personnel in the case that we have a problem with our original site. These days, the public cloud is normally what many enterprises use as their alternate site to move at least IT operations to. So there are a couple of variations on that. So a hot site. Now a hot site is the configuration of an alternate location. And what it really deals with is having hardware in place already. It has software in place already. It's got networking configured. It's got up-to-date data. How is that possible? Constant replication, real-time replication, such as replicating mission-critical virtual machines and data from on-premises into the cloud consistently, all the time. Then there's personnel. Well, we've got personnel at a hot site. In the case of the public cloud, that would be the technicians in the cloud provider data center. So a hot site then is the quickest switchover time because everything's already ready to go at a moment's notice. But of course, it takes more effort, more planning, and more maintenance, so it's more expensive than the other sites we're going to talk about, the next of which is a warm site. So a warm site is a disaster recovery site. It's got hardware, it's got software, networking, but it doesn't have up-to-date data. Okay, that means it would take time then in the event of a disaster, when we must go to this site, it would take time to get the data in place to continue business operations. That would be correct. So therefore, there's a longer switchover time than there is if it was a hot site. But that also means it's probably less expensive and required less upfront planning because we're not enabling real-time replication to that site. Personnel or staff, including technicians at the IT level, may or may not be present with the warm site. And then we have a cold site. This means we have basic IT infrastructure in place at an alternate location. It could be another physical building, or it could be in the public cloud. That means we might have networking in place, but that's about it. So we don't have any additional hardware, certainly no software, definitely no up-to-date data. There's no personnel there. And it means that we have the longest switchover time because nothing is there. We have a site, but it's not ready to go. But that also means that it's also less expensive than hot and warm sites. So when it comes to the Security Plus exam, you most certainly will be tested in some way on disaster recovery, either planning it or which type of site is the most appropriate, hot, warm, or cold, given a scenario.